It's been 5 years since we made the movie Summer Leaves, a short film. Me and some ragtag filmmakers got together and decided we'd make a movie, really to build our portfolios and get some experience. A few years earlier, I had done an internship in film production in Nashville, Tennessee at a company called Revolution Pictures. They were doing music videos for people like Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift before they became who they were. They were doing Verizon Wireless commercials, things like that. So I got trained in directing, producing, and screenwriting, and where I grew up in DeKalb County, Alabama, Sandra Lafferty, who played as June Carter's mother in Walk the Line, and she played in a lot of other films as well. She happened to be from Fort Payne, which was the county seat. And where I grew up in a farming town, Fort Payne was only about a 15-minute drive, and that's where we would go a lot of times on the weekends or to eat out at restaurants and things like that, because the farming communities, like the town I grew up in, there were only about 800 people. And there might be, a local diner or a Mexican restaurant, but, there's only so many times you can eat there and just get tired of it. So we would go to Fort Payne a lot. And Sandra was there, we had some mutual friends, and I asked her to be in the film, and the way we found Katrina Despain, who played as the main female lead, is I got on Sandra's Facebook page and I just started looking for profile pics that looked like headshots. And I presumed that maybe I would find an actress that way, and that's what happened. I got the idea because I just knew, actors hang out with actors, actresses hang out with actresses, they network, they add each other as friends on social media. And Katrina had a website, and so I reached out to Katrina through her website, told her she was in Atlanta, Georgia. I told her that we were just a couple hours away and we were going to be making this film, and asked her if she wanted to be a part of it. And so she would stay with Sandra, and then the only real money was spent was actually to give her some gas and food money. She did the project for free, just like everybody else. Brandon, who played as the main male lead, he was friends with Sandra and myself. And he has done a lot of acting, and he's actually a dance instructor in Birmingham, Alabama. And so he wanted to build his portfolio as well. And then the DP, Eric, he was actually from my hometown, excellent photographer who wanted to get some experience in the film industry as well. So he jumped on board, and together we were able to put together this short film. Regarding the music, a lot of people were involved in that, and I'll explain that along the way. There's people within your network that you can reach out to that will do things if they know that it's for a good cause or for good reasons. And if you can at least provide a place for them to stay and their travel expenses, a lot of people will say yes because of the opportunities that can unfold from that finished product. What we had on our side is Brandon was living in Fort Payne at the time that the short film was shot, and so was Sandra. Myself and Eric, we were only about 20 minutes away. The only person that really traveled to get to us was Katrina. If you see me look down some, it's because I'm actually watching the short film on this laptop and commenting along the way. The idea of Summer Leaves, I wanted to call it a love story in DeKalb County, but the other cast and crew didn't think that that was the greatest title. But I have a little bit of a marketing background, and my idea was to just tell people exactly what it is, because this is not a film that's going to land in the cinema or make it into Sundance or anything like that. So my idea was to let people know, hey, this is what you're about to watch is a love story, and this is where it takes place. But Eric had a great idea. He's actually the one that came up with the title Summer Leaves, and I liked it, the other cast and crew liked it, so we kind of met in the middle of the idea. We'll call it Summer Leaves, and the subtitle will be A Love Story in DeKalb County. So if you're ready, let's get started. So in the opening sequence here, you see the light moving through the trees. This is actually Eric shooting this in Nashville. If my memory is right, he and his girlfriend had some errands that they had to run up there, and I told him, hey, while you're up there, why don't you get some B-roll of Nashville. And the shots of Nashville, Tennessee, cutting back to Brandon, those shots were actually shot on some back roads in Fort Payne, Alabama. So in post, we made the lighting look identical to where it felt like he was actually in Nashville when really he was in Fort Payne, and the Nashville shots is Eric's great job shooting that as B-roll. Brandon pulling into the diner here. This diner is, at the time it was called Kamala's. I don't know what it's called now, but it's in Mentone, Alabama. And it's about a 20-minute drive from Fort Payne. And Mentone's pretty famous. It's a small town, but it's got a lot of tourism because people from the cities will come to the mountains and they'll rent cabins and Airbnb and things like that. A lot of history in Mentone, and there's a beautiful view of the valley where Fort Payne is nestled there, and then on the opposite side of Lookout Mountain where Mentone is, on the opposite of Lookout Mountain is Sand Mountain, and Sand Mountain is where myself and Eric are from. Kamala's was owned by a sweet couple whose last name were the Pagets. I don't think that they own it now, but we had all eaten there numerous times, and I just approached them and said, hey, what days are not so busy? And it was Sunday afternoons. So I said, can we just corner off a part of the restaurant for us to shoot this short film without you guys having to close down the business? And they said, sure. Now, the opening music is large gratitude to David Hammonds. David is a guy who has been a musician his whole life. His career was actually a UPS driver, but he is the producer at the studio in Mentone that the country music group Alabama own. If those of you know much about Alabama, and if you don't, you can look them up on YouTube. But back in the 1980s, they were a very popular country music group. And all of my travels, when people over the age of 40 or 50 find out that I'm from Fort Payne, they say, oh, the country music group Alabama. And I'm like, yep, my dad went to college with them, he knew them. This is a rural area, like where everybody knows everybody. So David actually is what has been hired by the country music group Alabama to oversee the studio in Mentone. David, who's been in the music industry for years, was able to get that song from a friend of his that had also been producing music for a number of years. Now, the gentleman on the left, his name is Ryan Trammell. Ryan is from the same town that Eric and I are from. I think that the local newspaper had like the top 40 or the top 50 leaders in DeKalb County, Alabama. Ryan was on that list. I saw how young he was and I was impressed, and I actually reached out to him, and he remembered, we had went to the same high school, and he had remembered me. When he was a kid, I was a high school student, and I was a peer of his sister, and he remembered me through that and through her. And we just became friends over time. And then when I was ready to make the short film, I was looking for people that I knew and trusted that wouldn't cause problems, you know. And Ryan was one of the people that stood out in my mind. So I called him up and I asked him, do you want to play this small scene for us? Because some people aren't. And you'll find that out when you're making your own projects. There's a lot of people that love to be in front of the camera, and there's a lot of people that don't. So you kind of have to figure that out along the way. But I asked him if he wanted to do it. He said yes, and I gave him a copy of the script. He read it, he said he'd do it, and away we went. And you got Sandra and Brandon that I don't really feel they need an introduction. They're great talent, and great to work with. Now the waitress there, her name was Keely, and she was a great actress. I've always believed that one of the ways you can find a great actor and a great actress is ask them to cry. If they can just start talking and start crying and you got a camera in their face, they're talented. And Keely was. I believe she lives in Nashville, Tennessee now. But at the time, I believe she was in Birmingham, and Brandon knew her really well, so we were able to get Keely through Brandon. If Katrina had not been able to make it from Atlanta over, we would have used Keely as the main female lead.
Yes, just water.
We were really impressed with your resume.
Thank you.
She was very impressed.
Well, he tells me all the things that I should know about as far as the technology world
Sure.
goes. My business really hasn't changed that much over the year, except for getting much larger, but I'm just personally not able to keep up with all the media response that you need to have the technology.
So you understand Google Analytics,
Yes.
SEO. You understand the regulations Facebook made recently.
Yes.
Sounds good.
Do you understand the
I'm sorry. Can you excuse me just for a second? Laura.
This footage right here in the car was actually shot on the back roads of our hometown, and that car is actually my mother's car. We needed, I think the model was, I believe it was a 2004 Toyota Camry. The year, of course, is 1999, but we knew that people probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a 2004 car and a 1999 car. When you look at the photos of the 99 and the 2004 models, they don't really look that different. So we believed we could get away with it. If my memory is correct, the camera is actually sitting in the back of Eric's SUV. One of the reasons why it's not shaking a lot is by that point, this was in 2015, internal stabilizers on cameras were really coming along, and the need for Steadicam was kind of becoming not as necessary anymore. I love Steadicams. I think they're great, but we didn't have a Steadicam. We certainly weren't going to drive all the way up to Nashville, which was a 2.5-hour drive, to rent a Steadicam. But with the internal stabilizers on cameras in 2015, we weren't really too worried about a lot of shaking going on. These days, the internal stabilizers are great, and now you have Steadicam they still have equipment, but Ronin has really become popular as well. The summer of 1999, DeKalb County, Alabama, I actually got that idea with that font being in the lower left of the screen, was from the movie Dear John back in the year 2010. It's a Nicholas Sparks adaptation of one of his novels. And the editing software we used for that was Adobe Premiere. That photo is actually my mother when she was about 25 years old, and the little boy is my brother. I thought that little boy could be passed off as Brandon. So the idea was she's looking at his family photos before she sits down and has some sparkling apple cider. Disclaimer, we're not depicting teenagers here drinking champagne or Prosecco. This scene is actually shot at my parents' home. It's a farmhouse on Sand Mountain, and they gave us permission to use it. But what's funny about this is, I don't remember how old they are, but both of them are certainly over the age of 21. But we put a fake label over actual champagne, and I didn't even think to tell Katrina that. But toward the end of the scene, she kind of got a bit giggly, and she says, "I think there might actually be alcohol in this." And I said, "Oh, there is," because you can sip it, but it's not like they were just throwing them back in between takes, because it's a prop. We don't need you drinking the prop up, right? So we had a couple of bottles there so that if he opened the first one and something went wrong and we needed to reshoot it, we could open up a second bottle. And, the champagne that we used, it was like a $5 bottle that you would get, at just your local grocery store. Fortunately, Katrina wasn't offended by it, but that was one of those things where the idea that someone might be offended that there would be alcohol in the product, I think I maybe dodged a bullet on that one. The lady out of focus is actually my mom. And we had some people say, that's bad cinematography, she was out of focus. We meant for her to be out of focus because the story revolves around the two. And when you're a teenager, the voices of the parents a lot of times is just noise, right? You're just like, okay, mama, I'm trying to get a kiss here. Would you please leave? Okay. And it kind of reminded me of when I was a little boy, there was a cartoon about the little Muppets. It might have been called Muppet Babies, I don't remember. But the Muppets had their life together, and then when the nanny or the mom would walk in and open the door and start talking to them, the voice, if I remember right, it was like wah 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 wah, and you can never understand what the character was saying. And so that kind of inspired this idea of this is their time together, this is their life, they're young and alive and passionate, and the interruption of the parent can be pretty annoying, especially when you're about to get a kiss on the couch. I mean, that's a big deal. Go away, mom, go away. Now, the body of water, that's actually in Scottsboro, Alabama, which would have been about a 45-minute drive from Fort Payne. Scottsboro has beautiful lakes. They join up to a place called Gunnersville, which is very famous for bass fishing. But the Tennessee River spills into these lakes and creates a lot of beautiful country. And that particular lake is called Goose Pond. There's a restaurant there. This is actually a beach area with a volleyball net. I don't know if you can see it here. But right behind us is a restaurant. The red and white checkered, that's, stereotypical picnic blanket. But I was able to find that fabric, I think, at the local Walmart. But I went and bought it and cut it in a square specifically for this scene. Now in 2015, when we made the short film, of course none of us have the kind of attire that you would have in 1999. I actually went back and watched episodes of Dawson's Creek, the first season, to be reminded of what the wardrobe was like. Baggy jeans, V-necks, which is in 2022, I'm making this video right now, V-necks have come back, and the 3 stripes that Adidas uses, those are back in style now. I actually went to Walmart, got a baggy pair of jeans for Brandon. That's one of my t-shirts that he's wearing, and I'd had that black cap for years. I mean, now I still have the cap, but it's super faded black. I mean, it looks more gray than black now. But when you look at them, this looks like 2 kids from the year 1999. This is how they dressed. Now in this scene, these khaki shorts that he has with the cutoff there at the knees, that was very popular in 1999. Dave Matthews was having sellout concerts. He brought a sound to the United States that Americans hadn't heard yet. It was just fantastic. And that wearing the A t-shirts and the hemp necklaces with the beads, all of that stuff was super popular in 1999. Hawaiian shirts, Hawaiian shorts that you wear to school, all of that was in. Bought a pair of khakis and I cut off the legs at the knees because that's what we did in 1999. There's Brandon's dance instructor coming out there on the docks. Now, this is outside the DeKalb Theater in Fort Payne, Alabama, but it is an event venue. It's not a theater anymore. So we actually use the inside of the movie theater in Scottsboro, Alabama, 45 minutes away, as our interior. It was owned by a Indian family, and I approached them and said, hey, we want to do this short film in the lobby. Would that be okay? And they didn't want to do it. And I said, it's not like we're going to have a film crew in here. It's going to be me and maybe 2 other people. And when they heard that, they're like, oh, okay. So what's great about small towns like that is, especially with the prevalence of cameras, we didn't have a big movie camera. You know, we were just using basic Canons. So when the people in the movie theater saw us, they just thought that we were local people dressed like this, messing around with cameras. They didn't think, you know, that we were making some kind of movie or short film. And that's why, you know, a lot of people ask, like, how are you able to get all of those people in that theater to volunteer their time to be in your scene? And we said we didn't. There was a ladder, and Eric just stood at the top of the ladder and held the camera up and just shot down at the crowd. Fortunately for us, nobody was dressing in a way that couldn't also be 1999 believable. There's a lady here with blue jeans and really tall boots, which is not what they wore in 1999, but you can get away with it. Now for the marquee, the people that change the marquee and take care of the DeKalb Theater, I was able to approach them and say, would you mind doing this for us, and let's just get this exterior shot. Would you change the marquee for us? And so I got on IMDb or the internet and looked up, you know, what were the top 10 movies during the winter time of 1999. And these were the movies that were showing. We want it to look like it's at least kind of cold or winter because we want to show that time has passed, like Brandon and Katrina's characters have been together for a while. Now that 1999 Letterman's jacket, that's actually my Letterman's jacket. I was trying to find a Letterman's jacket from a local high school because it was blue and I thought blue would look a lot better on film. I couldn't find one. People thought that they had them and they were either really torn and worn or they just weren't available. And so I said, you know what, forget it, let's just use mine. It's red, it's not blue, but we'll see how that looks. And I think it turned out fine. And the kid wearing my Letterman's jacket is actually one of my cousins. He's my second cousin. His name's Ethan. And I just asked him, would you mind just grabbing a handful of friends and being in this scene for us? And he said, sure. Now, the young woman at the counter, she actually worked there. And we got permission from the management, from her, would say, hey, would anybody that works at the theater be interested in being in this short film? And if I had this over again, and I remember we were on set and I thought to myself, we need to put her watch on her left wrist, but she wore her watch on her right. And that's rare. You know, most people, when they wear a watch, it's on their left. And that's the only time where I knew I needed to do something and I didn't do it because I was nervous, there were people around, we just needed to get this shot and we needed to get out so that we wouldn't annoy the theater owners. It was funny, I sent the short film when we first finished it, I sent it out to some friends that were fellow filmmakers. And one of my friends wrote back and he said, "The sound in the theater is terrible." He said, "You can't understand anything that they're saying." And I thought, you're not supposed to. We're communicating visually. She's not showing up. He's saying hi to his friends. What they're saying doesn't matter. So we purposefully didn't try to have good audio there. The idea is friends were coming to meet them, to watch a movie together, or they just bumped into each other. He says, "Hey, where's your girl?" Brenda's like, "She's not here yet. She's on her way." Like, I think that can be communicated visually. It wasn't that we forgot sound or we didn't set sound up properly. That was not having sound in that scene was not an objective to us. And I don't think that was a bad decision. I think that was appropriate. We got super lucky with the ceiling having those lights and how it blends into the moon. That was not planned. That's just one of those things where, oh, this is going to be great. And the other thing that I want to talk about is this song. People talk about the music in this short film. We had to use original music just because we didn't want to get in trouble with copyright violations, or, you know, we put it out there into the world and then 3 years later, YouTube, Vimeo, Facebook, whatever platforms we had it on shuts it down because the music, there's no proof that we got permission to use the music. When I was doing my film internship in 2012 in Nashville, I met a great musician there and I sent him 2 or 3 songs. I said, we need a song that sounds like this. And he got a couple of his interns. He did some soundtracks for different movies, and he got a couple of his interns to just sing this one lyric. So they didn't create an entire song. They just created this one, I don't know if you would call it stanza or what. And for that one stanza, we used for this particular scene. Now, what's interesting about this scene is the bulb in the background was actually yellow, and the lights that we were using on the faces had a bit more of a blue tint. We couldn't get past the bulb, the yellow bulb in the background, because it was a street light. And in rural Alabama, the street lights that they use there, at least, are this really orange-yellow color. And we wondered about that. None of us were color graders. None of us had experience in color grading at the time. And so we were worried about that, but the color grader, Perry from Nashville, who I'd met when I was doing my internship, he color graded the film for us after we finished it, and he was able to convert that orange color into a blue to match the blue on the faces of the characters. And I'll talk more about Perry there toward the end. This house is actually my grandparents' house. Both of them have passed away since, but they were gracious to let us use it. And while we were shooting this scene with Brandon and Katrina, Sandra Lafferty was there because she lived nearby and she enjoys being on sets, you know, and hanging out with us. Well, it was a great camaraderie. But I remember a very sweet thing. She hung out in my grandparents' house and just had this lengthy conversation about growing up in DeKalb County while we shot this scene outside in their backyard. Now, the gentleman opening the door, he was a theater teacher in Boaz, Alabama, in Marshall County. And we'd become friends. He had a passion for filmmaking, so did I. And I just asked him, I said, "Hey, we need someone to pretend to be Katrina's dad. Will you just step out the back porch and be grumpy and kind of angry and just say, 'Hey, we gotta leave. Hurry up. You know, you teenagers making out think you're in love and you're making out in my backyard. Let's go.'" So the idea was she's been living with her dad. Her mom's not doing very well mentally, and she has to go back for whatever reasons, back to Nashville, and her time living with her dad is now over. So that was the story that we were going with, and hope that was communicated in the script. And I remember giving him some direction. I was like, because he would kind of sling the door open, and those screen doors with the springs, you know, they just kind of close slow. So I was like, I want you to open the door and yell, "We gotta be ready, we gotta leave in 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever it was," and then slam it. And that's what he did, and I only had to give him direction once. He nailed it.
It's me.
Brandon? You live here now?
I just moved here. I'm I'm actually in an interview. Put your number in my phone and I'll call you.
Sure.
I'll call. I'm so sorry.
Old friend.
I haven't seen her in...
Sandra's character asks him, have you ever been married? And I talked to somebody later and they're like, that's kind of personal. And I said, it is, but if you're a kind, genuine, older lady, you can get away with questions like that because you're not digging, you're curious. And I just knew from experience, older people have all of these years of life and wisdom. And if you look at, and I told Ryan, I said, I want you to be offended. Here you are interviewing him, and he gets up to have a conversation with some girl, like he interrupts the interview. You know, like, you really want him on your team? But Sandra's reaction would be different. She would see life from a different perspective. She would say, there's history here, there's a story here. And I had it, made it look like Sandra's kind of digging a little bit, she's curious. But the purpose of that being in the story is, what has happened to Brandon throughout these years? 15 years has went by. Is he married? Is he engaged? Does he have a girlfriend? What matters is he's not married right now, and what he's been through over the last 15 years isn't so pertinent to the story, but for Katrina it is. And in the first draft, we told more of Brandon's story, and Brandon and Eric pulled me aside and said, we want to know what's happened to Katrina's character over the last 15 years, and we'll get there in a second. Now, this house that we're shooting in here is actually a multimedia company. They did newspapers and broadcast journalism. I had actually grown up with the owner's son, and they allowed us to use this home. The idea was, this is an SEO marketing company that does marketing for big businesses. And branding is being hired to oversee like the SEO and some of the branding and marketing for the videos. That was kind of the concept. And we didn't get specific with it because in that world, you kind of have to be a jack of all trades. You kind of have to know a little bit of everything. And to kind of pigeonhole you into one area of marketing and multimedia is it's just not realistic. You have to understand the industry. These are friends of Ryan's. Ryan was able to recruit some of his friends to be in this scene for us. Now, you don't see her, but the girl that gives Brandon the phone is Keely, which was the waitress at the restaurant that you saw earlier. And there, of course, is Ryan shaking his hand. All is good. We see a small character arc in Ryan where he was kind of suspicious and was kind of offended that Brandon left the meeting, but now he's shaking his hands and patting his back because they're getting along now. You know, they've been working together for a while. All is good. We had someone being kind of cheeky wrote a comment on one of the videos. I don't remember if it was Facebook or YouTube. That was like, yeah, you call it Summer Leaves, but it's shot at Christmas time because you see the Christmas tree here, and then of course the Christmas scene that we're going to see in Nashville. But the idea was, and I remember thinking, I just kind of laughed at that, is because the memory of them took place in the summer. It wasn't the idea of, or it's summer, but now it's Christmas. Like, I just let that comment go over my head. I think I actually deleted the comment because I thought it was so silly. The kind of point that I'm making there is, no matter what you do, no matter what you create, somebody somewhere is going to say something. It's just how people are. You're going to have to, in the words of Jay-Z, get that dirt off your shoulder and move on. They're not making movies. You're making movies. They're critics. If they were filmmakers, they'd be making movies, but they're critics because they don't either want to make a movie or they can't. Now, this song was written using a synthesizer in New York. David Hammonds, the music producer I was talking about earlier, he knew a guy named Spencer Bambrick. And if you look on IMDb, you can see Spencer's resume. Very talented young man. And we sent him also a couple of songs, and we said, we need music that sounds like this. And he created this beautiful little synthesizer song that worked. I thought it worked very well.
But I'm learning how to be happy. The most important lesson.
Now, this graveyard is on Sand Mountain, and it's near the community that I grew up in. And a lot of my family members are buried in this cemetery. The church in the background, a lot of my family members and extended family members and people that I knew growing up, they all attended that church. And the idea of the story here was people thought that this photo is her dad, but it's not. The idea was this is her late husband. She has been married and he has passed away. And the photo is actually a headshot of my brother. That's my real brother in real life, who's my best friend. I asked him, can we use your photo for this? And he said, sure. There was a shot of Katrina working in my mom's kitchen, and it was pretending to be her kitchen, and we had a pan of her wedding ring sitting like a display, and then a picture of her and my brother in the background in their wedding attire. But the shot just didn't look good, and we couldn't pull it off the right way, and we ended up scrapping it. But a lot of people get confused, and this is a fault of mine, because what we should have done is we should have planned better, and we should have kept that shot. We should have made the shot better, and we didn't. But we hoped that people would understand. But the feedback from a lot of viewers was they thought that this was her dad, and that really wasn't what we were trying to do. You know, the guy that was like, we're leaving in 15 minutes, and then he slams the door. They think that this is him. It's not him, and they don't look anything alike. But the guy that slammed the door, of course, was, you know, he's hidden by the dark, and so you can't really tell what his face looks like. This sequence is shot just on another back road near sunset. I wanted that beautiful golden hour for that scene. I thought that it was very, just a gorgeous appearance, and gave it a little bit of that romanticism that we were searching for in this scene. Now, this idea of her putting on the sunglasses and remembering her past love. If you'll watch the movie Cruel Intentions with Reese Witherspoon and Ryan Phillippe, at the very last scene, she's driving that beautiful roadster car, and she's putting those sunglasses on, and she's remembering her past life with Ryan's character, Ryan Phillippe's character. And I stole that idea from that movie and put it here. This scene is in downtown Franklin, which is outside Nashville. It was one of the final scenes that we shot. I just said, hey, let's all just load up, let's go. I'll buy everybody dinner. And we had a good time in downtown Franklin. It was about a 2.5-hour drive. Now, this idea of him being outside and her stirring and us shooting through the glass, if you watch the ending of the movie Dear John, they do something very similar, and I took that idea from that scene and put it here. This concept that you're not supposed to take ideas from other art, that's naive. Everything that we create is ideas and thoughts that we take from our surroundings. And so once you read a lot of screenplays or books or watch a lot of films, you're not going to be able to get away from whether you want to call it stealing or borrowing or being inspired by it or whatever terminology you want to use, it's the same thing. We can't escape that. So I'm very okay with saying we took that from Cruel Intentions and we took this from Dear John. Didn't have fancy camera equipment, we just had the simple Canons, and people walking down the street had no idea we were making a movie. They just thought we were a bunch of young people messing around with video cameras. There was no boom mic. Eric had really nice Rode mics, and the Rode mic was attached to the top of the camera. Now I want to talk about the color grading and also the story, and then we'll wrap there. But Perry Trest was someone that I'd worked with in Nashville, and he had what they call a Da Vinci board. So he had the Da Vinci color grading software, and he had a board that was created just for color grading. It was designed in such a way that when you color something, when you color film on this or digital footage, the coloring is appropriate for all devices. So once you color grade on this Da Vinci board, whether it shows up on film or whether it shows up on iPhones or, you know, current day YouTube TV on your laptop, the color is supposed to be appropriate. That was actually the most expensive part. He would color grade for National Geographic and for these really, big names. So for him to take time out of his, and it took Perry a full day to color grade it. And I was right there with him. I was interested. I wanted to see how he did that. If my memory is right, I think I paid him $300, but I'm not certain. But I think that was the amount. But he'd make easy thousands of dollars color grading stuff for major networks. So I'm very appreciative of him to help me with that. As time has passed, I still want to have good color on a finished product. But what I've learned is color isn't as important. You can get away with not having good color, but what you can't get away with bad sound. People need sound, they want sound, and if you don't have good sound, that will stick out to people as they're viewing your film. Now for the final part, the story of him being with somebody and her leaving and then bumping into them 15 years later. I would like to share a story with you. And I've never published this story. But when I was 16, there was a 14-year-old girl named Brittany. And she moved to the other farming community beside the farming community that I grew up in. Just a very lively, pretty girl. And we became very good friends. The church, I grew up going to church. Her biological dad and her stepmom went to that church, and she came to the church with them, and that's how we got to know each other. But me and her and my best friend at the time, his name was Jason, we hung out for months. I mean, we were close. And Brittany and I had feelings for each other, but we were too young. 2 years when you're 21 and 19, that's not a big deal. But 16 and 14, it's just not ideal. And I think if any of you teenagers are watching right now, I think you'll understand. It's not a no-go situation, but it's not an ideal situation. And as you get older, that age gap becomes less important. Her mom was not doing well mentally, and she lived in Nashville. And with a very, very short notice, Brittany had to leave and move back up to Nashville. And social media wasn't really prevalent until around 2006, and this was back in 1996. Social media didn't really start coming along. I remember Facebook came out around 2004, and it was just for college students, and I was a college student at Pepperdine, which is the shirt that I'm wearing right now. And, I think Twitter was out, but Instagram wasn't. And so it wasn't as easy to stay in touch with folks. And so I didn't have her contact information, and it might have been a situation where I could have gotten her mom's phone number, but maybe the phone had been disconnected 2 or 3 times at different times. Years passed, and I was in Nashville for my internship, working at that production company. And there was a college in Nashville called Belmont. And in Belmont, there was an independent movie theater where all they did was show the kind of movies that you could only watch at film festivals. And the movie Boyhood by Richard Linklater had came out, and I was there watching it with some friends. And I was at a concession stand, and Brittany was there. She turned around, and I looked at her, and I hugged her. And I pulled back, and she looked at me, and she didn't fight it. I think she knew that I knew her, but she might not know who I was. And just so you know, as a disclaimer, I hug people that I know. That's just who I am, and they all know this. And I had her by her shoulders, and I said, "You don't know who I am, do you?" And she goes, "Russell." And she looked down at the ground, and she goes, "Russell." And then she had a boyfriend with her, and he stepped in, and I immediately shook his hand, and I said, "Brittany and I grew up together. We grew up in the same church." And he was cool with that, and we talked for a few minutes. I wish I could tell you that we stayed in touch, but at that time, social media was prevalent. But Brittany wasn't the kind of personality that would participate a lot on that. So I haven't talked to her since that day, and I haven't seen her since that day, but I remember that. That was a very special story. And this story that you just watched was inspired by that. And this goes back to some of the things that I was saying earlier. Our observations and our experiences, they make up who we are. And you can't get around it. You'll hear people say, forget everything that you've learned and listen to this over here. That's not possible. Be cognizant that this has impacted you and shaped you, but you can't forget it. So go make your movie. Use real life experiences. Change their names. Change the names of the towns. No one's going to know. Use your real life experiences. Watch movies and read novels that are telling a story similar to yours. Borrow the ideas. You can call it borrow, steal, inspire, I don't care. And use it and create your own piece of media. And I wish you all the best.